Powiedzcie, kiedy będzie start. Yeah, I need to use it. Okay, welcome everyone in Zodiac, Warsaw Pavilion of Architecture. It's really nice to have you here. It's really nice to have you on YouTube, I hope, or we will have you in a few minutes, I hope. I'm really sorry for those troubles, but I hope that your presentation will let it better. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a few, like a brief introduction of our guest today. We have Sasha Roesler. Sasha is an architect and architectural theorist. Sasha works at the intersection of architecture, ethnography, science, and technology studies. Sasha is an associate professor at the Academy of Architecture of Mendrisio, the Università della Svizzera Italiana. And some of his publications for us are like fundamental, actually formative. His book from 2018, the Urban Microclimate as Artifact, was so important for our practice. And his most recent books, they're also laying in our office, and we're actually studying them like on a daily basis. At the end of last summer, we had the chance of sort of like having this excursion of his students through Warsaw, and today we're going to see the outcome of this fantastic seminar that was called, in fact, Energy Landscape and Energy Transitions. And just before we start, I would like to actually name and thank them personally, because in fact they are the protagonists of today. So let me just not miss anyone out. Thank you, Gloria, Francesco, Henry, Sibel, Tizien, Carol, Luigi, Justin, Sofia, Jan, Matilde, Ukash, which is actually here, Anna, Maria, Gauthier, Dennis, Kasper, and Davide. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here, also to be back. It's quite an experiment, I must say, to present now the outcome of a seminar. Usually this is not for the public, I must say, but I think it's really great to continue the conversation that we have started 1 year ago with friends here. Most of them are here, so also contributor to the seminar, and I think at the end of the presentation we will have a joint discussion. So I really hope everything will work, and again, my apologies for the inconvenience. Now I should have the presentation, and maybe we can also lower the light, if possible. So, as I said, I will basically present one of our key topics that we that we are dealing with in Mendrisio at the Academy of Architecture. So this is energy landscape. Of course, energy is a key topic for societies, but also for architecture. And Warsaw was a very, I think, interesting case study for us to kind of develop this topic further. So now I also need this. Okay, just to maybe say a few words about our work. So we are a chair for architectural theory. The title is Theory of Urbanization and Urban Environments, and we are particularly, focusing on, there is kind of, this is kind of a dia show now. Can you stop that? Okay, so thanks. So we are particularly concerned with environmental issues in architecture, so energy topic, but also climate. And 4 years ago, we started to develop this framework of energy landscape with a seminar, the CTS Energy Landscape, followed by also a lecture series with quite prominent, let's say, scholars involved, Dipesh Chakrabarty, for instance, or James Vines, or Eva Horn, or also Matthew Gandhi, where we addressed different aspects of today's energy, let's say, discussion, focusing on world ecology, carbon cities, climate control, energy infrastructures, embodied energy, energy governance. So big topics. And the question is how architects and architecture in general as a profession can deal with these more and more important questions, let's say. As Simone said, we had a particular interest in urban climate topics in the last few years. We had a 6 years research project on architecture and urban climates, and of course, also constantly referring to energy issues. Of course, climate and energy are kind of siblings and interrelated. So what I'm going to do now is first of all introducing this seminar, specifically the overall framework, so the notion of energy landscape, followed by some hints on our method, so how the students were investigating the city of Warsaw. And I will also include a few hints focusing on Geneva, another city that we have studied. And then in the second part, this is really kind of the center of this event, are 4 video essays that have been created by students groups addressing different topics of the energy landscape of Warsaw. So one group was focusing on the district heating system of Warsaw, which is of course the most important, let's say, infrastructure of the city. Then a second group was reflecting on the possibility to create a public air-conditioned environment. Then a third group was focusing on using natural forces within design processes, focusing on this on the Warszawianka sports complex. And then the fourth group that we would like to include it was focusing on the district of MDM, is that correct? So highlighting planning for solar access. And then I hope you will stay until the end. We will have a joint discussion with some of our also presenters during the seminar. So Adam Brishivara is also here, Gosha and Simone of this great research collective Centrala, and Monika Konrad unfortunately is not here, but Anna Ptak is here, one of our students is here, and I think we will have a nice joint discussion. Okay, so let me quickly introduce now this notion of energy landscape, how we see it for architecture. Why should we talk about energy landscape and not only energy? So this is maybe the question. And I think, first of all, we have to think about how architects and architecture as a discipline has framed the topic of energy in the last few decades. So, first of all, I think the most important aspect has been that architects were exclusively focusing on individual buildings, right? So they were concerned with buildings, but not larger urban environments, and kind of trying to understand the energy dynamics, let's say, between buildings and across buildings. So here are 2 of the maybe seminal publications representing this type of theory. On the one hand, Peter Rainer Banham's book, The Architecture of the Well-Tempered Environment, highlighting power-operated solutions in architecture, so the well-tempered environment. And on the other hand, Hassan Fatih and his famous book, Natural Energy and Vernacular Architecture, promoting structural solutions, passive types of solution, how we can deal with the climate. So really, we would say, contrasting approaches, but nevertheless, highlighting individual buildings and not other scales, let's say, of energy. And also the ecology movement, as it evolved since the 1960s, was very much concerned with the individual, the privatized, right? But not with the city, the bad city in the back. So self-sufficient buildings for a family, but not really rethinking the city, right, as a broader framework of energy. So, and also the labels and thermal standards, as they emerged in the last decades, were very much, of course, promoting energy efficiency of the individual building without taking into account ambient energy and, again, broader frameworks, urban scales for energy. So that's why we really think landscape and energy is kind of a dynamic pairing. So we would like to look at landscape through the energy lens or urban landscapes. That's what we aimed for in the frame of our seminar, and also vice versa, of course, looking at energy through the landscape lens, so to speak. And since several decades yet, I think there is kind of emerging interest in this kind of urban understanding of infrastructural issues, but more specifically energy issues. So the notion of urban landscape that has been coined after the war in Berlin, right? A completely flattened city with a lot of green spaces and forests in between. So Hans Scheraun and Hertha Hammerbacher were kind of developing this notion of urban landscape. We could also refer to urban scholar André Corbeau, who coined this idea of the territory as palimpsest, so a three-dimensional layered kind of territory, also with, let's say, energy infrastructures included. Historian Thomas Hughes was promoting and developing large technological systems, which is, of course, an important idea to understand the energy dynamic within cities. And then more recently, a debate in the social sciences on landscapes of energy. And as I said, we also try to kind of promote this idea in the last few years. So here are some slides. Hans Scheraun's idea of the urban landscape, kind of a view of a greenish type of urban environment after the Second World War. We could also refer, of course, to Warsaw, also promoting, in a way, similar ideas. Jerzy Soltan and his brilliant team, and Jerzy Soltan was a member of SIAM, of course, also reflecting new ideas on the megaform, we could say, kind of forming the landscape instead of building buildings, so to speak. So also a new type of ecological, proto-ecological thinking, we could say, emerging in Eastern Europe after the war. And then, as I said, the ecology movement, also with bottom-up solutions in the city, on the left in Lower East Side in New York, so early attempts to kind of gain solar access via solar panels, right, for water, for the heating of water, and then, and I think maybe more important now for our discussion, new types of microgrids emerging, for instance, in Brooklyn, New York, in recent time, really. So not only the individual homeowner having photovoltaic on the rooftop, but kind of using a group of people kind of forming a new type of network, right? And using the internet and blockchain for clearing, so to speak. So I think this is an important development, a collective understanding and a decentralized understanding of energy use in the city. And then an example from Switzerland, a very recent discussion also in the context of climate change with less and less snow in the mountains. So there's a discussion how to cover highways with photovoltaic panels. So kind of a second layer on top of highways, a new coding, so to speak, of transportation routes. And also the slopes of the mountains are now discussed as new sites of huge solar farms in Switzerland. So I think we will really see now a new type of harvesting emerging in many countries in Europe. So, and then I would like to say a few words, of course, also about the specificities of energy in the city. So not only energy in general. And first of all, I would like to remind you in the most important aspect of 20th century energy system. And this was, of course, the idea of having a global energy hinterlands. So the city centers globally are depending on hinterlands, and here's just one example, Tony Garnier's famous Cité Industrielle, also with dams in the back, right? So providing energy for the city center. But in general, of course, cities are depending on remote places. Hermann Sergel's idea of kind of a new energy infrastructure for entire Europe, still in a, of course, colonial context, we could say, developed in the 1920s and 30s. Or, of course, a Soviet type of understanding of really not only exploiting nature, but completely transforming it, right? Kind of refabricating, restructure nature. And this is just one example of kind of ideas developed by Stalin. So how to kind of restructure the territory with new energy infrastructures. And of course also the modernist ideas on the city are coined by infrastructural thinking also, or more specifically energy infrastructure. So kind of a three-dimensional city, or represented in vertical sections, we could say, and generated by infrastructure. This is, of course, widely the city of the 20th century. These illustrations are taken from Alvin Boyarsky's issue on the city as energy system. And then also, an iconic building like Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe has to be reconsidered outside of Chicago, has to be reconsidered in light of energy hinterlands, of course. This is a completely overheated building. So it has too much glass, so to speak, and it uses air conditioning for cooling down the interior, right? So although we can't see it here, but I think it's very important now to very critically assess these, let's say, icons of modernist thinking in architecture. So energy is, of course, a very critical, not only technical topic, and I simply would like to remind you, there are many discussions also in conceiving energy as energo power. So we are talking about mechanical and electric power on the one hand, but also about institutional, political, and economic power at the same time when we are talking about energy. Then also different components of energy, of course, technological ones, but also the actors are important, the flows, so the resources, energy itself, the money, and so on. And I mentioned the scale. So we can't only focus today on the individual building, but we have to kind of reconsider energy on new scales, on urban scales. So here are also some of the, let's say, materialities that we discussed in our seminar. We talked about energy systems, but also the relationship between centralized and decentralized solutions, and then also politics and norms play an important role. So I think city can really play a critical role in promoting energy transition. This is, I think, clear. There are a lot of, I think, promising examples. At the same time, we also have to see that there are contrasting tendency with, of course, geopolitical dimension, which are in sharp contrast to the promotion of low-carbon strategies. So there's really now a struggle, I think, for many also city administrations to find a way to do it on their own, so to speak. And of course, also Poland is a good example with its entire dependency on coal, right? And there's a cultural dependency and so on and so forth. We also discussed this last year. So just a few words about how we also assessed energy transition as such, as a concept. And I think for us as architects and also as educators at a architectural faculty, the most important idea is to make cities more productive in terms of energy. So, and that's why I really like to share this quote with you by Dean Hawkes, talking about productive energy landscapes. So he said, the city that produces all of the energy it needs for its buildings and the urban infrastructure is, of course, only a vision. To take the first steps towards its realization would transform the agenda for research and practice in architecture more radically than any idea since the advent of the modern movement, end of quote. So I think it's, of course, this is a program, and I think in a way also in our seminar we try to follow this this path of thinking. So in this sense we also have to talk about new infrastructure in the context of renewable energy sources, or a new type of infrastructural modernity, we could say. You are certainly familiar also with these different components that are currently widely discussed. Of course, the question of new, let's say, low carbon or renewable energy farms, wind farms, solar farms, the question of location also, then the question of energy storage. This is a completely unsolved problem, as you all know. So where to store and how to store electricity. The emergence of new microgrids, as I already mentioned it, as a possibility to kind of establish a decentralized type of energy provision. Data, of course, and the question also of smartness, let's say smart city solution. And then, of course, also there are solutions on a building scale, heat pumps, etc. So I think the important thing is really to rethink the landscape in terms of energy. So what is within the city and what is outside of the city, if we start to think about rethinking a non-carbon energy future, right? So it's about a combination of centralized and decentralized sources, certainly. And again, just to give you also two examples, what are the implications for urbanism, for urban development? An old image taken from Ludwig Hilbesheimer's book, The New City, kind of a non-figurative type of urbanism, we could call it, a term used by Charles Waldheim. So a territory coined by infrastructure, by productive side, but not really urban in a let's say, from a city perspective. And then on the other hand, of course, a figurative type of urbanism coined by buildings, existing buildings, Warsaw. Take Warsaw as an example, and the question how we have to retrofit it, how we have to transform it, how we have to adapt it in light of energy transition. So I think decentralization and centralization are an important or one of the key topics that have to be discussed in light of energy transition. And also, of course, gray energy. Take a battery of a car and its production sites, which are global, and the distribution chains, right? The supply chains for all the components, and then how we use it maybe in Warsaw, the electric car at the end. So, I mean, to really reach the goal of a net zero emission city, it's, we can't think that at currently, I would say. It's too complex. It's an enormous challenge, right, to really become net zero. And I also would like to mention the let's say, tensions between different goals. There are conflict goals. So on the one hand, to provide low carbon energy sources, but then on the same time, remain affordable for wide strata of the society. This is a key problem in Poland, as I learned, or as I know, of course, and then also to secure energy provision at the same time. So this is really a trilemma or a dilemma, how to achieve this. And we could also put it in another way, another diagram, saying similar things. So there is a strong conflict between economic growth, environmental protection, and social justice, right? So there are resource conflicts, there are development conflicts, and there are property conflicts that have to be considered. So a really high complexity for achieving the goal of energy transition, or a great challenge for energy transition. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And just to give you one example, of course, energy poverty is also a topic in the city of Warsaw. We learned this specifically for the district of Praga, right? So which is not that well connected to the district heating network. So not all the households would have direct and cheap access to energy sources. So I think this is also an important topic when we talk about urban energy. So to make it now really short, urban energy transition, it's really an interaction between urban change and the transformation of energy system. This was in the center of our seminar, so to conceive energy transition also as a topic for urban transformation, right? And vice versa. So now I will quickly go through and give you some examples how we also now work in our seminars with the students. But first of all, let me quickly just remind you how we use this notion of